All right, How to Know God by Swami Prabhavananda and Christopher Isherwood as translators and commentators. I was surprised. All this time I thought Prabhupada from the Hare Krishnas translated and did commentary for this, but I was wrong. So I'm going to skip the translators forward. Basically, just sort of just explains some stuff, some detailed stuff. Basically, this is a commentary of the Yoga Sutras. Yoga means union, as I believe the first section is going to talk about, so I'm not going to go into that. And sutra is sort of like our word. We use sutures as stitches to sew somebody up. So a sutra is like a thread. And so it's the bare bones of an outline. And also, and so these are the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, or Patanjali, as some say. You say however you want. Patanjali, I don't know, I like saying it that way now. And so he was a teacher who sort of taught this yoga method. And of course, each of these, I believe, 196 sutras in 4 sections, they're not usually not even full sentences. They're just sort of some key words because people didn't have access. It's hard for us to realize that in the ancient world, pens didn't exist, but paper was really, really expensive. And so you had to be of certain means to have paper laying around. That's why scholar actually comes from the term for leisure. You had to have enough money to have the leisure time and to be able to afford books, which were really expensive because paper and papyrus and all that stuff was very expensive. And writing was not necessarily known by everybody because, again, you had to have the means to be able to learn how to read and write. So what they would do is they would memorize some key phrases, and very often the person teaching would also have commentary around the key phrases, but you would memorize the key phrases. And so these sutras are from the Sanskrit, not always complete sentences. And so this is the translation based on what they think it means, and then the commentary based off of that translation. Okay, that's all the commentary you're getting from me. I'm just going to let everyone else just sort of do their thing. I'm just going to read this and try not to comment very much unless I feel compelled to do so. All right? So, part 1 of How to Know God, the Yoga Aphorisms of Patanjali. Part 1 is Yoga and its Aims. So, the first sutra. This is the beginning of instruction in yoga. And now I really want to make a commentary here because there's a lot I want to say about how this could be translated differently. But we'll go with this because this is actually a common way to translate this first line. This is the beginning of instruction in yoga. The commentary. Basically, yoga means union. It is the Sanskrit ancestor of the English word yoke. Hence, it comes to mean a method of spiritual union. A yoga is a method, any one of many, by which any individual may become united with the Godhead, the reality which underlies this apparent ephemeral universe. To achieve such union is to reach the state of perfect yoga. Christianity has a corresponding term, the mystic union, which expresses a similar idea. Boha, one of the classical commentators on these aphorisms, defines Patanjali's use of the word yoga as, quote, an effort to separate the Atman, the reality, from the non-Atman, the apparent, end quote. One who practices yoga is called a yogi. Hence my name on Facebook, Yogi RJ, one who practices yoga. All right, second sutra. Yoga is the control of thought waves in the mind. According to Patanjali, the mind, the chitta in Sanskrit, the mind is made up of 3 components: manas, buddhi, and ahamkar, or ahamkara. Manas is the recording faculty which receives impressions gathered by the senses from the outside world. Buddhi is the discriminative faculty which classifies these impressions and reacts to them. Ahamkar is the ego sense, which claims these impressions for its own and stores them up as individual knowledge. For example, Manas reports a large animate object is quickly approaching. Buddhi decides, that's a bull. It is angry. It wants to attack someone. Ahamkar screams, it wants to attack me, Patanjali. It is I who see this bull. It is I who am frightened. It is I who am about to run away. Later, from the branches of a nearby tree, Ahamkar may add, now I know that this bull, which is not I, is dangerous. There are others who do not know this. It is my own personal knowledge, which will cause me to avoid this bull in the future. And yes, I am emphasizing the words that are emphasized here in the text. God, the underlying God, the underlying reality, is by definition omnipresent. If the reality, capital R, reality, which is God, if the reality exists at all, it must be everywhere. It must be present within every sentient being, every inanimate object. God within the creature is known in the Sanskrit language as the Atman, or the Purusha, the real self. Patanjali speaks always of the Purusha, which means literally the Godhead that dwells within the body. But we shall substitute Atman throughout this translation because Atman is the word used in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, and the students are therefore likely to be more accustomed to it. According to the Upanishads and the Gita, the one Atman is present within all creatures. We can also, for those of us in the Western audience who may grow up in Christianity, can also substitute, though not accurately, but in a way that helps us understand, can substitute the word soul for Purusha and Atman. Got like a scar on my head or something. I'm sorry, that was my little bit of commentary there about the... Look at that, that's crazy. About Atman. And so the one Atman is present in all creatures, or you could say the one soul is present in all creatures. That's all the commentary you're getting from me. I'm done now. Patanjali, following Sankhya philosophy, believed that each individual creature and object has its separate but identical Purusha. This philosophical point of difference has no practical importance for this spiritual aspirant, or for the spiritual aspirant. The mind seems to be intelligent and conscious. Yoga philosophy teaches that it is not. Let's do that again. The mind seems to be intelligent and conscious. The yoga philosophy teaches that it is not. It has only borrowed intelligence. The Atman is intelligence itself. The Atman is intelligence itself, is pure consciousness. The mind merely reflects that consciousness and so appears to be conscious. Knowledge or perception is the thought wave. Knowledge or perception is a thought wave, which is vritti in the Sanskrit. So knowledge or perception is a thought wave, a vritti in the mind. All knowledge is therefore objective. Even what Western psychologists call introspection or self-knowledge is objective knowledge according to Patanjali, since the mind is not the seer, but only an instrument of knowledge, an object of perception like the outside world. The Atman, the real seer, remains unknown. Every perception arouses the ego sense, which says, I know this. But this is the ego speaking, not Atman, the real self. The ego sense is caused by the identification of the Atman with the mind, senses, etc. It is as if the little electric light bulb would declare, I am the electric current, and then proceed to describe electricity as a pear-shaped glass object containing filaments and wire. Such identification is absurd as the ego's claim to be the real self. Nevertheless, the electric current is present in the light bulb, and the Atman is in all things, everywhere. When an event or object in the external world is recorded by the senses, a thought wave is raised in the mind. The ego sense identifies itself with this wave. If the thought wave is pleasant, the ego sense feels, I am happy. If the wave is unpleasant, I am unhappy. The false identification is the cause of all our misery. This false identification is the cause of all our misery. For even the ego's temporary sensation of happiness brings anxiety, a desire to cling to that object of pleasure. And this prepares future possibilities of becoming unhappy. The real self, the Atman, remains forever outside the power of thought waves. It is eternally pure, enlightened, and free, the only true unchanging happiness. It follows, therefore, that man can never know his real self as real capital S self as long as the thought waves and the ego sense are being identified. In order to become enlightened, we must bring the thought waves under control so that this false identification may cease. The Gita teaches us that yoga is the breaking of contact with pain. Describing the action of the thought waves, the commentators employ a simple image, the image of a lake. If the surface of a lake is lashed into waves, the water becomes muddy and the bottom cannot be seen. The lake represents the mind and the bottom of the lake, the Atman. When Patanjali speaks of control of thought waves, he does not refer to a momentary or a superficial control. Many people believe that the practice of yoga is concerned with making your mind blank, a condition which could, if it were really desirable, be much more easily achieved by asking a friend to hit you over the head with a hammer. No spiritual advantage is ever gained by self-violence. We are not trying to check the thought waves by smashing the organs which record them. We have to do something much more difficult, to unlearn the false identification of the thought wave, to learn the false identification of the thought waxes with the ego sense. I think that must be thought waves, not waxes. To unlearn the false identification of the thought waves with the ego sense. There's a typo there. This process of unlearning involves a complete transformation of character, a renewal of the mind, as St. Paul puts it. No commentary. I was going to go somewhere, but no. What does yoga philosophy mean by character? To explain this, one may develop an analogy of the lake. Waves do not merely disturb the surface of the water, they also, by their continued action, build up banks of sand or pebbles on the lake bottom. Such sandbanks are, of course, more permanent and solid than the waves themselves. They may be compared to the tendencies, potentialities, and latent states which exist in the subconscious and the unconscious areas of the mind. In Sanskrit, they are called samskaras. The samskaras are built up by the continued action of the thought waves, and they, in their turn, create new thought waves. The process works both ways. Expose the mind to constant thoughts of anger and resentment, and you will find these anger waves build up anger samskaras, which will predispose you to find occasions for anger throughout your daily life. Anger becomes a habit. That's the moral of the story. A man with well-developed, that was my little commentary in there, not this. Okay, back to this. A man with well-developed anger samskaras is said to have a bad temper. The sum total of our samskaras is, in fact, our character at any given moment. The sum total of our samskaras is, in fact, our character at any given moment. Let us never forget, however, that just as a sandbank may shift and change its shape if the tide or the current changes, so also the samskaras may be modified by the introduction of other kinds of thought waves into the mind. While we are on the subject, it is worth referring to a difference of interpretation which exists between yoga and Western science. Not all samskaras are acquired during the course of a single human life. A child born with certain tendencies already present in its a child is born with certain tendencies already present in its nature. Western science is inclined to ascribe such tendencies as heredity. I'm not reading the words on the page, so I'm going to reread that and actually read all the words on the page. A child is born with certain tendencies already present in its nature. Western science is inclined to ascribe such tendencies to heredity. Yoga psychology explains that they were acquired in former incarnations as the result of thoughts and actions long since forgotten. It does not really matter for practical purposes which of these two theories one prefers. Heredity, from the yoga viewpoint, may be another way of saying that the individual soul is driven by existing samskaras to seek rebirth in a certain kind of family of parents whose samskaras are like its own, and thereby to inherit the tendencies which it already possesses. The yoga aspirant does not waste his time wondering where his samskaras came from or how long he has had them. He accepts full responsibility for them and sets about trying to change them. There are, of course, many types of mind which are not yet ready for the higher yoga practices. If you have a flabby, neglected physique and try to take part in a class for ballet dancers, you will probably do yourself a great injury. You have to start with a few simple exercises. There are minds which can be described as scattered. They are restless, passionate, and unable to concentrate. There are lazy, inert minds incapable of constructive thought. There are also minds which, though they possess a certain degree of energy, can only dwell on what is pleasant. They shrink away from the disagreeable aspects of life. But every mind, no matter what its present nature, can ultimately be disciplined and transformed. But every mind, no matter what its present nature, can only ultimately be disciplined and transformed, can become, in Patanjali's phrase, one-pointed, and fit to attain the state of perfect yoga. That was a long commentary on Sutra 2. And Sutra 2, remember, was simply, yoga is the control of thought waves of the mind. Sutra 3, the man abides in his real nature. Then man abides in his real nature. When the lake of the mind becomes clear and still, man knows himself as he really is, always was, and always will be. He knows that he is the Atman. His personality, in quotes, is mistaken. His, quote, personality, end quote, his mistaken belief in himself as a separate, unique individual disappears. Patanjali, in quotes, is only an outer covering, like a coat or a mask, which he can assume or lay aside as he chooses. Such a man is known as free. Such a man is known as a free, illumined soul. Sutra 4 and 5. At other times, when he is not in the state of yoga, man remains identified with the thought waves in his mind. 5. There are 5 kinds of thought waves, some painful, others not painful. So the commentary for 4 and 5. A quote, painful, end quote, wave According to Patanjali's use of the term is not necessarily a wave which seems painful when it first arises in the mind. It is a wave which brings with it an increased degree of ignorance, addiction, and bondage. Similarly, just so, a wave which seems painful at first may actually belong to the category of those that are, quote, not painful, end quote, provided that it impels the mind towards greater freedom and knowledge. For example, Patanjali would describe a lustful thought wave as painful because lust, even when pleasantly satisfied, causes addiction, jealousy, and bondage to the person desired. A wave of pity, on the other hand, would be described as not painful because pity is an unselfish emotion which loosens the bonds of our own egotism. We may suffer deeply when we see others suffering, but our pity will teach us understanding and hence freedom. This distinction between the two kinds of thought waves is very important when we come to the actual practice of yoga discipline. For the thought waves cannot all be controlled at once. First, we have to overcome the painful thought waves by raising waves that are not painful. To our thoughts of anger, desire, and delusion, we must oppose. To our thoughts of anger, desire, and delusion, we must oppose thoughts of love, generosity, and truth. Only much later, when the painful thought waves have been completely stilled, can we proceed to the second stage of discipline, the stilling of the not painful waves, which we have deliberately created. The idea that we should ultimately have to overcome even those thought waves which are good, pure, and truthful may at first seem shocking to a student who has been trained in the Western approach to morality. But a little reflection will show him that this must be so. The external world, even in its most beautiful appearances and noblest manifestations, is still superficial and transient. It is not the basic capital R reality. We must look through it, not at it, in order to see the Atman. Certainly it is better to love than to hate, better to share than to hoard, better to tell the truth than to lie. But the thought waves which motivate the practice of these virtues are nevertheless disturbances in the mind. We all know instances of admirable yet earnest men. We all know examples. We all know instances of admirable, earnest men who become so deeply involved in the cares of a great reform movement or social relief project that they cannot think of anything beyond the practical problems of their daily work. Their minds are not calm. They are full of anxiety and restlessness. The mind is truly illumined. The mind of the truly illumined man is calm. Not because he is selflessly indifferent to the needs of others. Not because he is tongue. All right, the mind of the truly illumined man is calm, not because he is selfishly indifferent to the needs of others, but because he knows the peace of the Atman within all things, even within the appearance of misery, disease, strife, and wants. Sutra 6 and Sutra 7. 6. These 5 kinds of thought waves are right knowledge, wrong knowledge, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. Right knowledge, wrong knowledge, verbal delusion, sleep, memory. The right kinds of knowledge are direct perception, inference, and scriptural testimony. So, there are 5 kinds of thought waves: right knowledge, wrong knowledge, verbal delusion, sleep, memory, and then beginning at 7, he's going to go through each of these kinds of waves. So the first wave is right knowledge. Right knowledge The kinds of right knowledge are direct perception, inference or logic, and scriptural testimony. Whatever our senses perceive as right knowledge, provided that there has been no element of delusion. Whatever we infer from our direct perception is also right knowledge, provided that our reasoning is correct. The scriptures are based upon the superconscious knowledge obtained by great spiritual teachers while in a state of perfect yoga. Therefore, they are also right knowledge. They represent a kind of direct perception far more immediate than the perceptions of the senses. And the truths they teach can be verified by anyone who attains to the superconscious vision. Sutra 8. Wrong knowledge, the second kind of vritti. Wrong knowledge is knowledge which is false and not based upon the true nature of its object. And the classic example, everyone uses this one, the classic example given in yoga literature is the piece of rope which is mistaken for a snake. In this case, wrong knowledge will cause us to fear the rope and avoid it or try to kill it, which is silly because it's a rope. But we look at it, we think it's a snake, we have wrong knowledge, and now we are basing our thoughts, feelings, and actions on this wrong knowledge. That's just all it's saying. 9. Verbal delusion arises. The third vritti, verbal delusion arises when words do not correspond to reality. A common form of verbal delusion is jumping to conclusions. We hear somebody speaking and from a hasty and inaccurate picture of his meaning. We hear somebody speaking and form a hasty and inaccurate picture of his meaning. In political speeches, one often finds a double verbal delusion. The speaker believes that his words correspond to one reality, the audience attaches them to another, and both are wrong. Such expressions as, quote, the spirit of democracy, end quote, the American way of life, end quote, and so forth, bear rich crops of verbal delusion every year in the newspapers and over the radio, and now on TV, because this was written in 1953. So not everybody had a TV in those days, or hardly anyone had a TV in those days. TV, I think, was just invented in 1947, so very, very, very few people. So radio was still the medium of entertainment and news. All right, Sutra 10. Sleep is a wave of thought about nothingness. Ha, Seinfeld. Sleep is a wave of thought about nothingness. And sleep is the fourth vritti. So, what that is to say, dreamless sleep is not an absence of thought waves in the mind, but a positive experience of nothingness. It cannot therefore be confused with the waveless state of yoga. If there were no thought waves in the mind during sleep, we should not wake up remembering that we knew nothing. If there were no thought waves in the mind during sleep, we should not wake up remembering that we knew nothing. As S. Radhakrishnan remarks in, it must be Swami Radhakrishnan remarks in his Indian philosophy, Mr. So-and-so, after good sleep, goes on being Mr. So-and-so, since his experiences unite themselves to the system which existed at the time when he went to sleep. They link themselves to his thoughts and do not fly to any others. Such continuity of experience makes it necessary for us to admit a permanent self, capital S self, underlying all contents of consciousness. I'm going to have to read that sentence like a bunch of times. Memory, 11. The fifth vritti, 5. Memory is when perceived objects are forgotten but come back to consciousness. Memory is a kind of secondary thought wave. A wave of direction, a wave of direct perception causes a similar a wave of direct perception causes a smaller ripple or series of ripples. The thought wave of sleep also causes smaller ripples, which we call dreams. Dreaming is remembering in your sleep. All right, so we got through the 5 vrittis, and then we have a big section coming up. So I figured I would do this for about a half hour at a time, and so we hit the half-hour mark, although there was a few minutes of me sort of introducing a little bit, but it's a good time to stop. So we are going to begin next time with the sutra number 12, and it's going to have 12, 13, 14, and 15, and then a good deal of commentary. All right. So thank you for joining me for the How to Know God, the Yoga Aphorisms of Patanjali or Pantajali. And I will see you next time. Peace.